Hey everyone! Today I'm going to be showing you how to crochet Ollie the Owl, who's always ready to keep love's tree lively with laughter, wisdom, and a no-fly zone for boredom. So Ollie can be made in sport, DK, or plush yarn by adjusting your hook size. Today I'll be crocheting with worsted weight yarn and a 4mm crochet hook. If you haven't already, be sure to snag the matching greeting card to make an adorable and one-of-a-kind gift that your friends and family will love. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. Alright, so we are starting in on Ollie the Owl's tutorial. So we're going to begin with his body, and by working with this sort of light green mint colored yarn. And the very first thing we need to do is form a magic ring. So let's review how to get a magic ring formed. Alright, so let's review how to form a magic ring. So we're going to start by taking a little length of our yarn, and I'm using white for this demonstration. Make sure you're using the correct color for the pattern that you are following along with. So I'm going to take this white, and I'm going to reserve myself a little bit of a tail. So I'm going to take the end of that yarn, and I'm going to stretch it so I've got about 5 inches or so of a tail. And the tail is going to be the end that is not attached to our ball of yarn. So once we've got about 5 inches or so reserved of that tail, we're going to take our yarn hand. For me, that's my left hand, but if you're a left-handed crocheter, this might be your right hand. But we're going to take our yarn hand and make a bit of a finger guns here. So my index and my middle finger, I'm going to put them together, and I'm going to be looking at the inside of them. Then I'm going to take that tail that I've reserved, that 5 inches, and I'm going to lay it so that it's over the lower digit on my index and my middle. And then I'll take my thumb and I'm going to press the yarn to those 2 fingers. Then I'm going to take my hook hand, which is for me my right hand, but could be your left hand, and I'm going to grab the working yarn. Once I've got that grabbed, I'll take it and I'm going to wrap it around the back side of my index and my middle finger so that it's sort of close to that top digit. I'll flip my hand over so you can see. So I want it to be close to my top digit, so you can see it's closer to the 2 tops of my fingers here. So we're going to wrap that around, and then once we've got it around the top digit of those 2 fingers, we're going to bring it so that it goes behind our thumb again. So I use my thumb and I pinch that second wrap in place. Then we're going to keep wrapping, this time going around the lower digit on our 2 fingers. So I'll flip my hand over so you can see these 2 wraps here. This is that one I just made, going around that lower digit. So we'll wrap around that lower digit, and then we're going to take our working yarn and one more time snug it behind our thumb, and then just pull it out of our way. So once we've done that, we should have 2 wraps and this sort of X shape on the insides of our hands. So once we have all of the yarn wrapped around our yarn hand here, we're ready to take our crochet hook in our hook hand, and we're going to flip our yarn hand over so that we're looking at the back side of our fingers. So we should have 2 wraps, one around the top digit, one around the lower digit on our yarn hand. We're going to take our hook and slip it underneath that top wrap, and then use the hook part to snag that lower wrap and bring it underneath the top wrap. Then we're going to take both of our hands and we're going to flip them over so that we're looking at the inside and away from our body. So I'm flipping out and away from my body. And then I'm going to bring my 2 hands together, so my yarn hand and my hook hand. I'm going to bring them so the index finger here on my hook hand can touch the back side of my yarn hand. Then using the thumb and index finger of my hook hand, I'm going to grab both the wrap on my hook and the wrap still on my fingers right where they meet. So I'm going to kind of snag the 2 of them together right there. Once I've got those pinched between my thumb and index finger on my hook hand, I can let go with my thumb and then gently slide those wraps off of my index and middle finger. So now that I've done that, let's locate both the tail, that's the end that's no longer attached to our ball of yarn, so it's got this blunt cut end on it. And we're going to kind of pull that over into the 12 o'clock position. So kind of up and away. And then let's locate the working yarn. That's the stuff still attached to our ball of yarn. So once we've got those two identified, we're going to take the working yarn and begin tensioning it. So to do that, we'll take our index finger on our yarn hand. That for me is my left hand. Could be your right hand for you if you're a left-handed crocheter. And we're going to slip the working yarn over the top of our index finger. Then we'll take our middle, ring, and pinky finger on our yarn hand, and we're going to wrap those around that working yarn. Once you've done that, we also need to sandwich this working yarn in between our magic ring and our tail. So to do that, I like to take my middle finger and thumb on my yarn hand, and I'm going to grab that tail with my middle finger here. And then with my thumb, I want to grab the ring. So we don't want to grab our working yarn, which is kind of going in through that ring. We want to just get the bottom end of the ring here. And once you've got those two, we're going to kind of pinch them together. And you can see that sandwiches our working yarn in between the two of them. Once we've got those grabbed with our yarn hand, we can let go with our index and thumb on our hook hand. And the ring here that's on our hook is really loose. We'll tighten that by pulling our index finger up and away. You can see how that tightens that yarn. And then once we've done that, we're ready to yarn over and draw through the loop on our hook. So we'll take our hook, put the yarn over our hook. So I kind of just swing around the back side there and grab it. And we're going to pull that working yarn directly through the loop on our hook. Once we've done that, you can let go. It's not going to come undone. It won't come untied, which is very comforting because we've spent all this time creating it. The last thing we need to do before we're ready to begin is we're going to take the tail, and you can see it's threaded through our magic ring. We're going to take that tail and we're going to pull it out from the center of that ring. And from here, we're ready to begin working in the magic ring. We also need to work over the tail as well. So we'll take that ring and we'll take the tail and we're going to set them together so that we are working over both of these strands, the ring and the tail. All right, you are ready to go ahead and continue on in your pattern. All right, so now that I have my magic ring formed, we're ready to start in on round 1. And if you look up at the top left-hand corner, you'll see the instructions for the pattern are going to kind of track along with us as we work. So feel free to reference the written pattern and, of course, the top left corner for the pattern. All right, we're ready to start in on round 1, where we need to place 6 single crochet stitches in our magic ring. So to make our first single crochet stitch, we're going to take our hook, and we're going to go both through the loop of the magic ring and under the tail. So we'll take our hook and go from front to back through the ring and under the tail. Then yarn under by putting the yarn under our hook and draw that working yarn up into a nice tall loop onto our crochet hook. Then we'll yarn over, so putting the yarn over our hook, and draw our working yarn through the only 2 loops left on our crochet hook. And that forms our first single crochet stitch, which we need to mark with our stitch marker as well. So there's our first single crochet stitch marked. We're going to continue adding single crochet stitches in that exact same way until we have all 6 needed for round 1. So again, we'll take our hook, go through our magic ring and underneath the tail, yarn under and draw up a nice tall loop, then yarn over and draw through both, which forms our second single crochet stitch. Alright, I have all 6 of my single crochet stitches for round 1, and I'm ready to close off the round by taking the magic ring's tail and pulling tightly to close off the round. And that sets me up for round 2, where we need to put 6 I and C stitches, and that means increases 1 in each of the 6 single crochet stitches we made from round 1. So to start, we'll take our stitch marker out, and we're going to take our hook and we're going to go through the stitch that our stitch marker was just in. So we're going to go through both sides of our stitch 2, both the front loop and the back loop of that little V shape. So we're going to go from front to back, push through the front loop and the back loop. And then from here, it's just like how we made our single crochet stitches in our magic ring. We'll yarn under and draw our working yarn through the stitch that we just went through and up into a nice tall loop. Then yarn over and draw through both loops on our hook. We also need to mark this stitch that we've just created, as it's the first stitch of our round, and that'll tell us whenever we reach the end of round 2. So there's the first half of my increase. To finish increasing, I need to put a second single crochet stitch in the same stitch that I just put my first. So if you look, you can see the little hole here that my stitch is coming out of. I need to go through that same space a second time. So I'll just push my hook from front to back through, yarn under, and draw my working yarn through and up into a nice tall loop. Then yarn over and draw through both of those loops. And you can see that makes 2 of these little V shapes, one of which is marked, coming out of the first stitch we made in our magic ring for round 1. We're going to continue working around, going to our next V-shaped stitch here, so right here, and we're going to make another increase by going through that next V, yarning under, drawing up a loop, and drawing through both, and doing that a second time in the same stitch. So there's my second increase. I'm going to keep increasing in this way. So 2 single crochet stitches in each stitch until I get to the end of my round. Alright, so I've gone all the way around, and you can tell that you have because the next stitch will be the one with your marker in it. Before I start round 3, I'm going to pull my magic ring tail tightly one last time, and then I'm going to give it a trim. So I'm going to flip my work over, and I'm going to cut that magic ring tail so there's a little left on the back side of my work, and that sets us up for round 3. So for round 3, we have some parentheses. So let's start with what we know, which is to take our stitch marker out and to put 1 single crochet stitch in the place where that marker was. That's the first part of our parentheses here. So 1 single crochet, and then mark. And then the next thing inside of those parentheses is to put an increase in our next stitch. So we're going to increase in the second stitch. And that's everything inside of those parentheses one time. So if you look just outside, you'll see a multiplication sign and the number 6. What that's saying? What that is saying is that we need to put, So what that means is that we need to repeat everything inside of those parentheses in the order it appears. So 1 single crochet, increase, 6 times total to have 18 stitches at the end of our round. So we've done everything inside one time. We need to continue repeating that pattern of 1 single crochet, increase, until we've done it 6 times total and are all the way around our round. So let's keep repeating that pattern. 1 single crochet stitch, increase, Alright, so that was my last increase, which takes me to the end of round 3. So it sets me up for the beginning of round 4, where we're going to put 1 single crochet stitch in the next 2 stitches of the round. So there are my first 2 single crochet, so 1 in the first and 1 in the second, and then an increase in the 3rd stitch of the round, and that's everything in the parentheses one time. I'm going to repeat that pattern 5 more times for a total of 6 all the way around. Alright, that was my last increase, which wraps up round 4. I'm ready for round 5, where I'm going to put 1 single crochet stitch in the next 3 stitches of a round. So that's 1 single crochet stitch in the first stitch of the round, 1 in the second, and 1 in the third, and then an increase, and then just like the last 2 rounds with parentheses patterns, we'll repeat that sequence of 1, 2, 3, increase 5 more times for a total of 6 repetitions all the way around. Alright, that was my last increase, which wraps up round 5. So for rounds 6 through 14, we just need to put 1 single crochet stitch in each of the 30 stitches we just created with round 5. So as you work, make sure that you always mark your first stitch, and I will see you back here whenever I have finished that 14th round in our pattern. Alright, so I have just finished the last stitch of round 14, and you can see my piece has gotten quite a bit longer since we last saw each other. So first, before we continue on with round 15, I wanted to point out that there's a chance your work may have been working inside out as you go. So if you look at my piece here, I've got the right side facing out, and you can see my stitches have these tidy little X shapes. If your piece looks a little more like this, so a dead giveaway is that your magic ringtail is hanging on the outside of your work, And then also that your stitches have this little line that runs through them. This is actually the inside of your piece and needs to be on the inside of that sphere shape that we're making. So this is a good time to flip your piece right side out or inside in. And we're ready to continue on with round 15. So with round 15 we're learning a new type of stitch, but let's start with what we already know, which is to put one single crochet stitch in the next 3 stitches of the round. And then we need to decrease in the next stitch. So to do a decrease, we're going to take our hook and we'll go through our next stitch just like we normally would. Yarn under and draw up a loop. But then we're going to do that exact same thing in the stitch right after the one that we just pulled a loop through. So the next stitch of our round will go through, yarn under, and then also pull up a loop. And then with the 3 loops on our hook, we're going to yarn over and draw through all 3 of them. And that takes 2 stitches from the previous round and puts them together into 1 stitch for this round. So we're going to repeat that sequence of 1, 2, 3 single crochet and then decrease 5 more times for a total of 6 repetitions all the way around this round. Alright, that was my last decrease. I'm ready for round 16, where we're going to begin by putting 1 single crochet stitch in the next 2 stitches of the round. And then a decrease. And then we're going to repeat that sequence of 1, 2 single crochet, decrease, 5 more times for a total of 6 repetitions. Alright, that was my last decrease of round 16, so I'm ready for round 17. We're going to put 1 single crochet stitch in the first stitch of the round. And then decrease. And then repeat that sequence of 1 single crochet, decrease, 5 more times for a total of 6 repetitions all the way around. Alright, so before we crochet our last round here on the body, which is round 18, we're going to want to stuff the inside of the body. So I'm going to take this loop here on my hook and I'm going to pull so that it's long and then take my hook out. And then as I stuff, I need to be careful not to push this loop or my active working yarn inside. But we're going to take some stuffing and stuff the inside of Ollie's body here. Alright, so I have the inside of the body stuffed, and I'm ready to make my last round of single crochet. So I'm going to take my hook and go back through that loop we drew up long, and then pull the working tail to tighten that loop down on my hook. Then for round 18, which is the last round, all we need to do is decrease in each stitch all the way around. Alright, that was my last decrease, so we are ready to fasten off, and we'll do that by taking our stitch marker out of that stitch we've marked. And then we need to slip stitch in that same stitch the marker was just in. So to make a slip stitch, we'll take our hook, go through that same stitch, yarn under, and draw a loop through that stitch. And then we're going to draw the loop we just created through the only loop left on our hook. And that's how you form a slip stitch. Then we can cut our working yarn, and we need to cut a tail. So reserve yourself about 6 inches or so of your working yarn, and then trim. Then we'll take that slip stitch that we just formed, and we're going to take our hook and draw the loop of the slip stitch long until the tail we cut passes through. And then we'll tighten that slip stitch down by pulling the tail, which tightens the stitch around the tail. Then we need to close up this last round that we made from the body by taking the tail that we've just cut and threading it through the eye of our yarn needle. So we'll thread our yarn through the needle's eye, and then we're going to take the needle and sew through just the front loops of each of these stitches. So I right now have both the front and the back loop on my yarn needle. We've been crocheting through both of these. So the front loop is the one closest to the front of our body, and the back loop is the one closest to the inside or back of the body. So to grab just the front loop, we're going to take our needle and go from underneath and up between those two loops. And then just pull the tail that we cut so it wraps around and sews through that stitch. Then we'll rotate and continue sewing through just that front loop of the next stitch. And we'll keep working around until we've sewn through all of the front loops. When you've sewn through all 6 front loops, we're going to pull that tail that we just sewed with, which is going to pull all of those stitches together and close that last round off. Then to secure those stitches that we've sewn together, we need to tie a surface knot, which is a little bit of an embroidery trick. We'll take the tail that we've been sewing with, and we're going to loop it over the surface of our work, forming sort of a ring or O shape. Then we'll take our yarn needle, and we're going to grab just a little bit of the fabric of our work, and then sew up through the center of that loop we made on the surface of the work itself. And then we're going to pull slowly and gently on our needle, and that will take the loop that we've made and wrap it around the tail, which ties a knot. Then to send that knot to the inside and to weave in the remainder of the tail that we've been using to sew, we'll sew down very close to where the knot is on the surface of the body and into the fabric of the body, and then just out through any point on the body itself. And we're going to pull that tail, which both sends the tail and the knot we tied inside. Once you've done that, you can unthread your yarn needle, and by pulling on that tail and cutting close to the surface of the body, that weaves the tail in. Any extra tail that we didn't use to sew, you can discard. And that wraps up the main part of the body. Next, we're going to add the little feather detail here on the top. So let's locate where that magic ring is that we formed. So this is where we just sewed. We're going to flip over and locate that magic ring. And we're going to take our crochet hook and we're going to push it into the center of that magic ring. So just go straight down through. You might have to wiggle your hook a little bit. And then out through the space between the round we made in the ring and round 2. So I've got my hook just slipped through that magic ring. And then we're going to join the same color we used for Ollie's body here at this location to make the feather. So let's grab some of that green mint colored yarn. I've got some here. And we're going to form a loop here with it. So I'm just going to make a little loop out of it and put that on my hook and then carefully draw that loop through to fasten on. Then we need to make sure we're working with the working yarn and not the tail from the little loop we've just pulled through. So double check you've got the right yarn here on your hand to tension. And to make these little feather details, we're going to start by chaining 4 stitches. So to chain, we'll take our hook and we're going to yarn over. So put the working yarn over our hook and draw the working yarn through the loop on our hook. And that forms our first chain stitch. The loop on our hook doesn't count as a stitch. So we need to continue yarning over and drawing through. There's my second chain, my third, and my fourth. Then in the second chain from our hook, again, remember we don't count this loop here on our hook. So in the 1, 2 second chain, we're going to form a slip stitch. So we're going to take our hook and go through that second chain. Then yarn under and draw up a loop, and then draw that loop we just formed through the only loop left on our hook. Then we're going to continue slip stitching in the remaining 2 chains left for a total of 3 slip stitches. So we're going to go through our next chain, yarn under, go through, and then draw that last loop through again. And we'll make 1 more. So there are all 3 of my slip stitches. And then we need to slip stitch into that same space that we fastened onto. So we're going to push our hook again into that magic ring and out through the space between rounds 1 and 2. Then we'll yarn under, draw through, and then draw through a second time. So that forms the first feather. We'll do that a second time, the whole pattern, which is to chain 4 stitches. 1, 2, 3, 4. Then slip stitch in the second chain from our hook. So there are all 3 of my slip stitches down the chain. And then one last time slip stitch through the magic ring and into that same space between rounds 1 and 2. Alright, so there are the feather details added. So we can fasten off by cutting a medium length tail, 4 to 6 inches. We don't need very much. And then pulling that last loop on our hook until our tail goes through, and then tightening that last slip stitch down. Then we need to tighten both the tail we used to fasten on, so give that a pull, and the slip stitch tail, give that another tug. And we need to weave both of these tails in. So I'm going to start with the tail left over from when I fastened on. Thread the eye of my yarn needle with that tail. And I'm going to sew it down through the space between rounds 1 and 2 into the body, and then just out through any old place, which weaves it in. Do the same thing here with the tail we've cut when we finished making the second feather. So I'll thread the eye of my needle with that tail. And again, send it down. I'm going to send it down through the magic ring opening this time. And then out through just any old place here in the body. Then we can cut both of those tails. And that weaves them in and finishes the body with the feather detail. Alright, so next up on Ollie's pattern, we need to make the eyes, and we're going to make 2 of these. So I will walk you through how to make the first one, and then you need to come back and make a second one before we attach. Alright, so we're going to be using this white yarn, and we're going to begin by forming a magic ring. So once we have our magic ring formed, we're ready to begin in on round 1, where we're going to put 5 single crochet stitches inside of this magic ring. So when you have all 5 of your single crochet stitches added to your magic ring, you can go ahead and pull the tail to close off round 1. And then round 2, we're just going to be increasing in each of the 5 stitches from round 1. So we'll be putting 2 single crochet stitches in each stitch from round 1. So there's my first increase. Alright, that was my last increase, so we are ready to fasten off, and we'll do that by taking our stitch marker out and slip stitching to the same stitch the marker was just in. Then we can cut a tail from our working yarn. And then with that last slip stitch on our hook, we'll pull that loop until the tail comes through and tighten down. Then I'm going to go ahead and tighten my magic ring tail one final time, then trim it close to the fabric of the back side of the eye. And then I'm going to be pasting the eyes to Ollie's body, so I'm going to weave this tail in as well. So I'll thread the eye of it through my tapestry needle, and I'm going to sew and then through the back of the eye as well to weave the tail in, and I'll trim that. Which wraps up one of the eyes. We can also go ahead and embroider the eye detail on the eye. So I'm going to take some of my black embroidery floss, and I'm going to thread it through the eye of my embroidery needle. And then we're going to sew a line through the eye. And I'm going to reserve a little extra of this black tail on the back side here. So I'm sewing between the space between rounds 1 and 2. And I'll go back down across the way. And then on the back side of the eye, I'm going to tie these 2 tails together. So I'll go ahead and cut, and then just make a square knot on the back of the eye. And then trim any of the tails that you didn't need. Short, but not all the way off. And that wraps up one of the eyes, so let's repeat that same process with the second eye and then get them attached. Alright, so I have both of the eyes crocheted and embroidered, and we're going to be attaching them by using some glue and pasting them to the front of Ollie's head. And then we're also going to be pasting them so that the slant little eyes that we made are going down, so he looks sort of sleepy. So let's go ahead and grab Ollie's body. And the eyes are going to be pasted on between rounds 7 and 11, so sort of closer to the top of Ollie's head. And then also centered so that the little feather detail is centered between the eyes. So once you have the eyes positioned where you want, we can go ahead and grab the glue that we're going to be using to attach them. And we're going to add a little dab to the back sides of the eyes, just in the centers. And then we'll attach by pressing the eye to the surface and holding until the glue cools. And then we'll repeat here on the other eye, pasting them so they're right by each other. Alright, so once you have both of the eyes pasted on, we can go ahead and embroider the beak detail on here. So we'll grab a little scrap of orange yarn, and we're going to thread that scrap through the eye of our tapestry needle. And then I'm going to send it in through the space between some stitches on the other side of the right eye, and then come up so that I am in the stitch here on either eye. So I'm going to sew up through the left eye. And when I pull, I'm going to leave a little of the orange tail on the outside because we're going to come back and tie onto this to fasten the beak in place. So there's the first stitch up through. We're going to go down through the stitch closest to that one on the right eye. And then I'm going to come back up through that same stitch on the left eye and make it so there are 2 stitches that form the beak. So there's the first stitch, and also the second stitch, down through the same place I sewed the first stitch, and then up and out through the same space between stitches where the tail of the orange is. And that forms the beak, so I can unthread my tapestry needle. And I'm going to tie these 2 tails together. And then trim them short. And then I can use my crochet hook or my tapestry needle to push those tails inside of Ollie's body to weave them in and hide them. Alright, those are the eyes attached and the beak embroidered. Alright, so last we need to make Ollie's wings, and we're going to be working again in that same light green color. And the first thing we need to do is tie a slip knot and form a chain stitch. So let's review how to tie a slip knot and chain. Alright, so let's review how to tie a slip knot and how to form a chain stitch. So we're going to take our yarn, and I'm using white for this demonstration, so just double check you're using the correct color from your pattern. And we're going to reserve ourselves a little bit of a tail, just like we do with our magic ring. So I'm going to take maybe 5 or 6 inches or so of my working yarn here, make myself a little tail. And then we're going to take that tail and we're going to wrap it behind our working yarn. So we're sort of making like a lowercase letter B. So once we've got that wrapped around, we formed this loop here. We're going to kind of sandwich the working yarn with the tail. So bring it back around and kind of cross it over that loop. Sort of like a pretzel twist. Then when we've done that, what we need to do is draw this twist that we've just done, that strand, through this loop without pulling the tail all the way through, because that would just tie a knot. So I take my hook hand, which is my right hand, and I grab what I've laid over that loop and pull it. And then with my other hand, I grab my working yarn and then pull the loop through. And the reason I form my slip knots this way is because they tighten when you pull on the tail, but not when you pull on the working yarn. It won't tighten while you're trying to add stitches to it. So once you've got that slip knot formed, you're going to take your hook and slip it inside of the slip knot, and then pull the tail to tighten it into a loop down onto your hook. Then you're ready to begin tensioning by laying the working yarn over your yarn index finger. So for me, that's my left index finger. And then wrapping the rest of your fingers around our working yarn. And then I like to hold on to the slip knot itself with my middle and thumb on my yarn hand. And then we're ready to form a chain. So to chain, we'll take our hook and we're going to yarn over, meaning we're going to put the yarn over our hook, and then draw the working yarn through the slip knot we tied, and then pull up to form a nice tall loop. So that's our first chain. To continue chaining, we're going to just keep yarning over and drawing a nice tall loop through each time. One final thing though, the loop on your hook, as I'm sure I may have mentioned in the video before, that doesn't count as a stitch. This is sort of like a stitch in progress. So right now I have 2 chain stitches formed. I'll yarn over and draw another stitch through. That'll be 3, 4. And as you add chain stitches, I tend to move my middle and my thumb up closer to my hook to help me sort of tension my yarn a little easier. So as I chain, I just keep shifting my hand down the stitches that I've just created. Alright, so that's how you tie a slip knot and chain. Okay, so now that we have our slip knot tied, we're ready to start in on round 1. Well, there's really only one round here of the wing, and that's to chain 5 stitches. So there are my 5 stitches chained. And in the second chain from my hook, I'm going to place a half double crochet stitch. So to make a half double crochet, we're going to start by wrapping our yarn around our hook. So we'll take our hook and we're going to go kind of clockwise and around the front of the yarn, and then swing back around to wrap the yarn around our hook. Then we'll go into that second chain from our hook, yarn under and draw up a loop. Then we're going to yarn over and draw through all 3 of the loops left on our hook. And that forms our first half double crochet. We need to make a second half double crochet in the next chain. So again, we're going to wrap our yarn around our hook, then go through that next chain, yarn under and draw through the chain, then yarn over and draw through all 3 loops left on our hook. In the next stitch, or the next chain, we need to form a double crochet. So we'll start the same way we did on our half double crochet by wrapping our yarn around our hook. Then we're going to go through that next chain, yarn under and draw up a loop. Then we're going to yarn over and draw through 2 of the loops on our hook, and then yarn over and draw through the remaining 2 loops on our hook. And there's our half double crochet. And in the last chain, which is technically the slip knot we tied, we need to make a treble crochet stitch. So we're going to wrap not once, but twice around our hook, then go through that slip knot or chain, yarn under and draw through the chain, then we'll yarn over and draw through 2 of the loops on our hook, yarn over and draw through 2 of the loops on our hook, And one last time, yarn over and draw through the 2 remaining loops on our hook. And that forms the wing, so we're ready to fasten off. We need to cut a tail to sew with, so 6 inches or so. So cut your working yarn. And we're going to take our working yarn that we've cut and we're going to pull it through that last loop on our hook and then keep pulling until it goes all the way through, and then tighten that last loop down. We also need to tighten our slip stitch down, so our slip knot that we tied, go ahead and pull that tail as well. And that forms one of the wings. Let's crochet one more and then get them attached to Ollie's body. Alright, I have both of Ollie's wings crocheted and I'm ready to attach them to the body. So I'm going to start by threading the slip knot tail through the eye of my tapestry needle. And then I'm going to grab Ollie's body and I'm going to sew the slip knot tail straight through the side of his body, even with the bottom of his left eye, just straight through to weave it in. Then to attach the wing, I'm going to thread the tail left over from when I made my treble crochet stitch. And then I'm going to tack it to the side of the body by sewing into the fabric of the body. And then I'm going to go through the fabric of the wing, back through the fabric of the body, and then through the fabric of the wing, until I've sewn all the way across. So once I've done that and the wing is attached, I'm going to go ahead and tie another surface knot, just like we did when we closed Ollie's body up. So we'll loop our yarn over the surface of our work, and then sew into some of the fabric of the work and up through that loop. And then by pulling, that loop will tie around our working yarn, and then we can just weave that working yarn into Ollie's body. Then we can cut both that tail we just sewed and the tail from the magic and the tail from the slip knot that we tied. And that attaches the first wing to the side of Ollie's body. Let's go ahead and repeat with the other wing on the other side. Alright, so there are both of Ollie's wings attached. And then the last thing we can do is embroider some feathers here on the front of Ollie's body. The pattern calls for a darker green, but I'm going to opt and use this white color so it matches his eyes a little bit better. You can choose whatever color you'd like, of course, to embroider the feathers. So I'm going to take that scrap of white that I've cut and thread it through the eye of my tapestry needle. And then to sew the feathers on, I'm just going to sew little lines here on the front of his body. So I'll start by coming through I'll start by sewing through the space between some of my stitches here towards the bottom. And I'm going to leave a little tail left outside just like I did with the beak. And I'll sew these feathers on just kind of randomly here on the front of his body. Sewing my way across, just adding these little details here on the front. And I think this will be my last feather, so I'm going to send my needle back over to the same space that I went through to start sewing. unthread my tapestry needle, and then we'll tie these two tails together just like we did with the orange. Trim them nice and short, and then use the end of our tapestry needle to sort of push them into that space between stitches that they're coming up out through. Alright, and with the stitches here on the front for his feathers sewn, that wraps up Ollie's tutorial.